Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming this morning and attending. My name is Ann McDonald. I am with the Hazelden Betty Ford Foundation. The Hazelden Betty Ford Foundation is the #1 nonprofit organization in the United States dealing and treating substance misuse and mental health disorders. So, as part of the Hazelden Betty Ford Foundation, my job is in the prevention wing. So we work to prevent harm coming from alcohol and other drug use in the first place. So our approach to prevention is an empowering process that promotes individual, family, and community health throughout life by using effective and practical strategies. So we look at this as one would look at a public health prevention triangle, right? So on the ground level, we have identifying and strengthening protective factors. This is what is already going on in your community, in your school now, at Gulliver specifically, that is healthy. What your community does and how your community is that promotes health. And I will say, by spending the last week with your kids, they are a group of healthy students. They are beautiful children, they are vibrant, they are excited to be alive, and they have a really solid foundation of health and protective factors. The adults that are involved in their lives are tight. This is obvious just by being here, right? Like, the adults care about them, they trust the adults, solid protection. So the base level, identifying and strengthening protective factors that contribute to our well-being. Moving up then, so up this pyramid that I'm drawing with my hands, the second step of prevention would be identifying and addressing any risk factors that could potentially interfere with well-being, right? So here we are at the base level, everyone is solid, happy, healthy. The second step at the triangle would then be, what could potentially throw us off course, right? What could be risky and affect our health? Identifying those things. And then finally, at the top of the triangle, identifying and intervening on behaviors then that could lead to disease. So we address the risk factors, and if those risk factors are playing out, intervening on them at the top there. So as the triangle goes, right, the majority of people here on this healthy level, there'll be a smaller subset of people perhaps displaying risky behaviors or risky thoughts or ideas, and then finally at the top, this a smaller percentage of people, or students in this case, who may be experimenting with alcohol and other drugs, right? So usually a smaller number, and is a smaller number, down to general health in the bottom part. So when we're talking about addiction with your students, and as an organization, we're coming at it as a health-based approach, right? Addiction is a disease, and so we use health language around that. So we're taking out any stigma or judgment that could be associated with. We define addiction with the students and as an organization as an individual's repetitive, compulsive use of a substance or the performance of a behavior despite negative consequences, right? So when we're talking with the students, I like to identify with them the performance of a behavior, right? Sometimes to give them an example, like how can something that's not a substance become addictive, right? And they're like, oh, well, we've heard of screen addiction, right? Well, how does that look? Well, I don't put it down and I keep getting in trouble, and I don't put it down and I keep getting in trouble, right? And my mom eventually takes it away from me. So negative consequences are occurring. Not saying that they are screen addicts or phone addicts, but to give them an example of, right? So the repetitive compulsive use of a substance or the performance of a behavior despite negative consequences is how we define addiction. So when we're talking about risk factors for addiction, we're looking at 5 main components, and we can actually take these 5 components and narrow it down to 3. On the primary level, that ground level of prevention, the 3 main components for someone to be at risk for developing an addiction or a substance use disorder would be family. By family, I mean genetics, right? What our health history is made of. We know that substance use disorder or addiction, and I'm going to use those two terms simultaneously, synonymously. Substance use disorder has a genetic component. So if there is a history of addiction in a family, the child or person is more inclined to then develop an addiction themselves. Age of first use, number one risk factor contributing to addiction. So the earlier a person starts or introduces alcohol or other drugs to their body, the more likely they are to develop an addiction or incur harm from using alcohol and other drugs. This is because brain development, as brains finish developing around 25, right? This is the average age when a brain is finished developing. If alcohol or other drugs are introduced to the brain prior to that, they influence the brain's development, the brain's continued development. They do so by delivering unusually high levels of dopamine to the brain. So our brains are reward motivated, and the reward is dopamine, right? So when we eat food, we get a gust of dopamine. Our body says, yes, we need that, the dopamine goes off, we know to continue that behavior, right? When we do something we enjoy, such as swimming, playing with our dog, whatever, dopamine is released. Alcohol and other drugs create an artificially high amount of dopamine, more so than any other behavior would do so. So the brain is very attracted to that. It is very motivated to continue on with that because it's getting a lot of dopamine in it. Why this is dangerous to a developing brain is the neural pathways in the brain of a young person are actually being formed by that dopamine, right? They're getting rewards and figuring out how the brain is going to work, what it's going to do for the rest of its life by what is giving the dopamine, what is giving the reward to it. So when a person introduces alcohol and other drugs at a younger age, they're altering their brain development, quite literally. So family, age of first use, and then finally surroundings, and I'll come back to the other two, but surroundings meaning our environment around us, right? And so oftentimes when I'm talking with students, they'll be like, when I'm asking them about surroundings or environment, they'll say, well, you know, if you come from a really bad home where people are using drugs all the time and maybe there's neglect and da-da-da-da-da, right? Yes, kind of painting that picture of what a bad home where drug use is made. And I can see that picture, and I'm sure we all can. And that is not a good surrounding for a child to grow up in. But having the students really look at the surroundings that they exist in, right? What is prevalent in your surroundings? How do your surroundings affect your health? Meaning, you all live in Florida, it's beautiful, you're outside, you're getting fresh air, you're playing in the ocean, the water, right? Like, this is healthy, this is good. Very different from where I'm from in Idaho. I'm not outside nearly as much because it's cold, right? So that's one part of your surroundings that is beneficial. But looking then, when we're talking about alcohol and other drugs, how prevalent alcohol or other drug use is in our surroundings, right? Oftentimes we don't consider the amount of use or the existence of, say, alcohol or nicotine, for instance, in our culture, because it's there. It seems normal. It has been fairly normalized, right? But that normalization can then be a risk factor, meaning we don't perceive harm that comes along with it because it's just part of. It's here, it's normal, and we have assumptions of then it's safe, it's relative safety. It's not, it's lack of risk associated with it. So family, age of first use, and surroundings are the main three risk factors for addiction. However then, cravings and tolerance come into play when a person has started to use alcohol or other drugs. If a person is starting to use alcohol or other drugs and they develop a craving for the substance, right? If they feel that craving in their body in response to needing another drink of alcohol or wanting another drink of alcohol, that is an indicator that they may be moving towards addiction. Tolerance is going to vary for each person depending on body size, metabolism. Are you biologically a male or a female? There's different factors that will affect tolerance. Those who have a naturally high tolerance are in one case, safer from immediate repercussions from alcohol or other drug use. We'll say alcohol for right now, right? So by not getting as intoxicated in a situation, being able to hold their liquor, so to say. They can tolerate more, so the immediate surroundings or the immediate risks not as prominent. However, if somebody begins to develop a tolerance because they continue to drink, or their tolerance is already at a level naturally because of their body size, etc., and they drink to get drunk, on top of that, building a tolerance is the body getting used to the alcohol or other drugs in it, and more than is required to get the same desired effect. So that's another indicator, or another risk factor for addiction. So we have this nice little acronym, the FACTS, and I took them out of order, but family, age of first use, cravings, tolerance, and surroundings are the primary risk factors for addiction. So then we're going to talk with the students about the stages of intoxication. Most of them know what it is to get drunk, right? They know what being drunk looks like, whether they've seen somebody or seen it on TV, whatever. But going through with them what's actually happening in the brain and body as they are becoming intoxicated, or as they are watching somebody become intoxicated. So the first thing, decision-making, judgment. This is affecting the prefrontal cortex of the brain, right? We start going, as more alcohol is added to a body, so let me back up real quick and say the average serving size, or the average amount of alcohol that an average adult can consume in an hour without becoming intoxicated is 1 serving. Yeah, so meaning a shot, a glass of wine, or a beer, approximately 1 serving. This is very average, right? More than that gets added, and the body starts shutting things down that are not absolutely imperative to its survival, so it can process and deal with the alcohol that's in it. So the first thing to go is decision-making and judgment, right? We know people can make pretty impulsive decisions, maybe get a little emotional, so the prefrontal cortex is being affected here. This is the part of the brain that the students are still, that our students are still, is still under development, right? This is what's developing in them right now. So theirs is already not the best judgment maker, because that's where they are naturally. This is forming. Decision-making and judgment goes. More alcohol is added, and it starts then affecting closer to the lower part of the brain, motor skills. We see people staggering around, maybe dropping things, like they set something on the table, it falls off. Next comes nausea and vomiting. So when talking with the students about this, when a person vomits from alcohol use, that is their body's instant reaction saying, enough, stop, pause, I'm throwing the emergency brakes on, I don't want any more, and they expel it, right? However then, if somebody continues to drink, and also the passing out and vomiting, these can happen, they don't necessarily have to happen in this order, right? Passing out then is not somebody falling asleep. It is not going to sleep. It is the body saying, enough, I'm going to turn off now. I need to turn off, I can't handle this anymore. And then finally, the last stage, when we're getting to the body has turned off as much as it can. If alcohol is still being added, this is affecting the very back of the brain stem, so our core survival, right? The animal part of us, our autonomic nervous system, our breathing, our temperature, our pulse, our heart rate. It's when coma and death could occur. So, teenage brain and other substances. We know that alcohol and other drugs interfere with the forming connections of a teenage brain. The connections are intended to be formed without the presence of alcohol and other drugs, who are overriding the natural connections, so to say. A brain in transition from child to adult is far more vulnerable to alcohol, right? Those connections are still being formed. As adults, our connections are formed. It's harder to interrupt the connections that are already there. Think of it like a road under construction, right? Versus a highway that's there. It's easy. I'm going to stop with that analogy because I'm going to go off on it. But it's harder to interrupt connections that are already made. We know that delaying use until the brain is finishing development is crucial for overall health of our children. So then we can talk to the students about nicotine. Go over, we know that nicotine is a drug, it's a stimulant, it's highly addictive, it does cause changes in the brain's chemistry, and it is found in tobacco products, including vape. We talk primarily with the students about alcohol and nicotine. Marijuana, additionally. Well, those three are the primary ones that we'll discuss with your students because those three are the ones that they will be in contact with soonest and the most. They are more readily available, they're more readily accessible and acceptable in a lot of areas. I do want to add, I have extra slides in here, so I'm going to be going past some of them, and if you would like to see them, let me know. No, you're good. I'm going to buzz past this. We know we find nicotine cigarettes. This is a hookah. These are vaping. This is juice to put in a vaping device. We go through what e-cigarettes are with students, what vapes are with students. There's a lot of false information, specifically from the tobacco industry, from the vaping industry, who are pretty much one and the same with a different cover on, as to the risks of these devices, as to the risks of the products that they're selling, and actually as to what they are in general. These products are not delivering vapor. It is not water vapor, as would be assumed when we call them a vape, right? What is inside the products is actually an aerosol. So water vapor, is a chemical compound that will evaporate. An aerosol is a chemical compound that does not evaporate. So regardless of if the vape has, if the liquid has nicotine in it, and regardless of the additional chemicals added to, it's sticky liquid going into a lung. Sticky liquid going into a lung. So it's like spraying hairspray onto the table and it's sticky, right? That's the same thing that is going into the lung from the vaping devices. And we go through, the vaping industry is smart, as the tobacco companies are, right? They have millions of flavors. How many adults like lemon and banana, right? Or chicken and waffles is one. This isn't the slide, but there's some really exciting names that are so much, I mean, like, it's like fruity pickle butt or something, like silly names that are kind of targeted at almost like teenage boys who are like 12-year-old boy, right, who has potty humor. Like those are the flavors that are, they also, the products that they have, so not just vaping devices, but look, here's Hello Kitty, there's Chanel, Star Wars, Marvel, sports teams, very much targeted at a younger audience, right? So this slide, I'd like to show this slide to the students because they don't know, and I'll just let this fill up, they don't know what is in the devices or the chemicals that are produced, whether the chemical is in the liquid or whether the chemical is created when the liquid heats up and it turns into the aerosol. But these are the chemicals that have been found, and this is not a comprehensive list, from vaping. You'll notice heavy metals are starting to load up there. You'll see the heavy metals, and the students are like, what? How do you get lead and silver and tin? And that's a great question. How do you get lead and silver and tin? I didn't stop at the slide before, but in the vaping devices itself, there is a coil that is the heating element that heats up the juice to then turn it into an aerosol that's inhaled, right? That heating element is made of metal. Oh, I'm sorry, I thought that was going to turn it yellow. The heating element is made of metal, so it's like when you put a pan, you've used your pan to cook on for a long time, right? You see the bottom and the metal has started to flake off because you've used it for a long time. Well, the same thing is happening with that heating element. So there's actually particles of lead, particles of whatever that metal is made of, have been found in lungs of people who are using vape or have used vape. So an accurate name, instead of vaping, would be aerosolizing. So if you see somebody vaping, you're aerosolizing. But aerosol is what it is. It's absolutely not vape, and that is just a misnomer because of. So some of these chemicals that are found in the vaping, antifreeze, also found in nail polish remover, antifreeze, paints and pesticides, embalming fluid, cigarettes, and fireworks, right? So these are things going into people's lungs. Again, not what we know though. They are not what is common knowledge. They are sold as a safer alternative to smoking. Well, if they're a safer alternative to smoking, the majority of students, high school students, middle school students, are not smoking. Why are they being advertised to them for a safe, to try to quit smoking or to try to decrease? They also have insanely high levels of nicotine in them, far more than a traditional cigarette would. I'm going to go off just for a minute on a bit of a thing, just because I think this is valuable information. A traditional cigarette has about 1 milligram of nicotine in it, so a pack would contain 20 milligrams of cigarettes. The Juul pod, for instance, the Juul vaping device, one would perhaps think is equivalent to a pack of cigarettes. It has 43.3 milligrams of nicotine, so it's double the amount of nicotine, right? So again, they're adding a more addictive chemical to their product. They're also making it so it is easier to ingest, meaning the body doesn't throw up its alarm system. When a smoker is smoking or somebody takes a drag of a cigarette, there's a feeling in the back of your throat, right? It's the body like, oh, ouch, hey, I don't like this. Adding nicotine salts and other additives to it, you're able to bypass that feeling, so the alarm system in the body is not going off. So we reiterate this with students. It's not healthy, it's really not safe, and it's not necessary. Do you have, yes, question please? That's a great question. So the question was, when comparing with a pack of cigarettes, how much would a student potentially vape per day, or how much would a person vape per day? Great question. And that depends on the person, for sure. However, one thing about vaping is, because it is not as obvious it is far more easy to vape in more places than it is to smoke in more places, right? It is a more accessible, you can perform this habit far more places than not without being noticed. So the intake of nicotine then could potentially, and often is, more frequent than the intake of nicotine from a cigarette. Also at then higher levels of nicotine being taken in through the vape. Okay, so moving to alcohol. Alcohol is by far the most abused or misused substance by teens and essentially by the population in general. Alcohol, because it is so common and it is so familiar in our culture, in our society, most over the world, right? It often gets overlooked as how dangerous it can be. Alcohol is the third leading preventable cause of death in the United States, third only to smoking-related illnesses and heart disease, alcohol-related deaths. It is also the number one out of all other drugs, out of suicide, drugs, accidents. I think those are the three variables, and when I say drugs, meaning like heroin, fentanyl, all other drugs, it is the number one cause of death out of those things for teenagers as well. It affects memory, it affects abstract thinking, problem solving, attention and concentration. It reduces levels of serotonin, encouraging risky activities. Our students in high school, middle school especially, they are already primed for risk-taking activities, right? They are impulsive. My colleague John has a really great analogy. I'm going to see if I can pull it out right, but as our children are growing up, we encourage them to take risks. So John uses the analogy of a child riding a bike. You remember when you learned how to ride a bike? And it was pretty scary. You're wobbly, this kid is on two wheels, they're expected to balance on it. And we're encouraging them, take this risk, and they do it, and they finally get it, and it's really exciting. Think of even just a baby learning to walk, right? You're gonna fall over a lot. These are risk-taking behaviors. This is how we learn and grow, so our brains are primed to do this, that behave this way. As the prefrontal cortex is developing, as hormones are flowing, even more so than in the teenage years, in the teenage brain. The difference with alcohol and these other risk-taking behaviors, and this is often when people will ask, and students especially, well, can't I learn to drink? You just have to learn to drink or moderate drinking, right? Or a parent will say, I would rather them drink in my house and be safe and I can watch them, and the sentiment is 110% understandable. We teach our kids how to do everything. We guide them. Alcohol and other drugs are different because the chemical compounds within them release the artificially high amounts of dopamine into their brain, unlike the other risk-taking behaviors that we encourage them to do, right? So it hijacks the brain thinking that these behaviors now, meaning alcohol and other drug use, are crucial for survival, for our continued development, because that is what the dopamine signals are doing within the brain. So we know it's a sedative, and it depresses the brain and the central nervous system. It creates mental instability, creating unhealthy habits, harder to actually perceive reality, understand reality, can lead to feelings of guilt and shame, and not necessarily from the alcohol use specifically, but from the consequences of alcohol use. The guilt and shame can come about. I'm going to pause there, sorry. It affects emotions, sedates inhibitions, so again, more impulsivity, and can sedate stress and discomfort temporarily, but then doesn't show the student how to, or show the person how to appropriately deal with that, right? The stress and discomfort is still there, it's just numbed it temporarily. Okay, so these are numbers. We're going to take a look at these numbers. These are from Gulliver specifically. So your students took our Students' Attitude and Behavioral Survey in October. So some of the results from the survey are up here for y'all. And I have this slide on here because oftentimes we will assume, it has been my assumption until seeing the data, if a student is using alcohol or other drugs, we'll see it in their grades. If they're the students at Gulliver are high academic achievers, right? Grades are important, we'll see it faltering in their grades. So here's what this slide is telling us. So we have the non-drink, or at the far right, these are all the 10th through 12th graders. You'll see that about 100% of them, actually not about, exactly 100% of them get A's and B's. Of all the 10, 11, 12th graders, they get A's and B's, that's great. Come over here now. Those who are higher risk drinkers, so we define higher risk drinking, also known as binge drinking, as 5 or more servings, so a glass of wine, a shot, or a beer in one sitting within the last 30 days. So meaning like at one time, like one party, right, not over. So 5 or more servings of alcohol is considered at one time in the last 30 days, a higher risk drinker. The higher risk drinkers also get all A's and B's. We can't really tell. The students who report using marijuana also get A's and B's, right? So this slide is definitely not meant, and we share this with students because not to say, well, you know, you can use marijuana and you'll still get good grades. Not at all. But perhaps they are seeing their friend drinking at a party, getting exceptionally drunk, right? They see their friend get super drunk, and then on Tuesday they come to school and they have this giant presentation and they blow it out of the water. They do great, right? Or they ace that test. The perception then of the kid, it's not super conscious, but the perception that's there is, oh, the alcohol and other drug use did not affect their school performance. There's not, that harm associated with it is not seen at all, right? So this is calling this behind the curtains, as it's important for parents and educators to know that it's not always noticeable through, or it isn't noticeable by grades. Okay, so again, these numbers are from Gulliver students, so higher risk drinkers. Out of the 10, 11, and 12th grade students, let me tell you this first. 10, 11, and 12th grade, I believe there's 595 10, 11, and 12th graders. Does that sound about right? More? Okay. On the number that okay. Out of that, 45 students reported on our survey were classified as higher risk drinkers, right? So that means that they have had, within the past month of taking the survey, they have drank to get drunk at least one or more times. So it's within that past 30 days. These percentages are from those higher risk drinkers. So this is kind of eye-opening to share with the students, right? Like oftentimes their perception, and this is a totally normal false perception, everybody gets drunk, everybody parties, it's normal to party on the weekends, that kind of thing. That is a commonly held false perception by high school students. As adults, we tend to share that a lot too. I know that I do, and I have to catch myself. The assumption that teenagers drink. Teenagers will drink, right? That is, however, 45 out of more than 600 students were the higher risk drinkers. So the number itself is actually significantly lower than the students thought. The students, when I shared these slides with them, were in utter disbelief. No, there's so many more people, right? But the statistics hold true, and I can talk about the validity of the survey if you want. However, though, the consequences of higher risk drinking, and when we show this to the students, they're like, oh, whoa, that's a big deal. This starts, their friend getting drunk doesn't bother them as much. Their friend getting drunk is like, it seems like it's more normal, not as concerned. But when they see that 31% of the people who are classified as higher risk drinkers regret a sexual situation, girls especially, they get pretty nerved. They're like, oh, what? That's concerning to them. 29% drove a vehicle after drinking, right? These consequences right here, these worry them. These are things that they don't want to see happening in their friends, that would concern them if they happen in their friends. But it's bringing the correlation of alcohol use with these results together for them. One more slide regarding higher risk drinkers. So second, the 10th through 12th graders, the middle left column there, this is the number of, or the percentage of students in these grades who report using the substances on the left. So we'll see that nicotine, the first two, cigarettes and electronic vaporizers, marijuana, are pretty consistently used, right? Cigarettes, vape, marijuana. These are typical drugs. Not typical, but these are the highest used in all categories. We look over then, so we look down the row at the regular 10th through 12th grade, or just the 10th through 12th grades in general. We see cigarettes and vaping are high, or they have a higher number than the rest. Marijuana has a higher number than the rest, and the remainder are fairly low. These are very few students, right? Very few students in these percentages. Go over to the non-drinkers, we turn almost all the way to zeros. The use of other substances by non-drinkers, very, very low. So those who do not drink, in general, have very low other drug use. But then coming to the higher risk drinkers, so those 45 students who reported being higher risk drinkers, look at their substance use. So even just the amount of cigarettes and vaping has increased drastically. But then looking down the list, 50% of higher risk drinkers use marijuana, where it's only 12.5 in the 10, 11, 12th graders as a whole. Again, the higher risk drinkers, these are those 45 students, so we are talking about a small number. Going back to at the beginning when I was talking about the stages of prevention, the higher risk drinkers would be those at the top of the pyramid, right? The 45, the smaller group at the top of the pyramid, where the prevention tactic then would be intervening on risky behaviors. For the 10, 11, 12th graders who have the perception of drinking and getting drunk does not carry as much harm, the level of prevention there would be the middle level then rearrange or helping them get an accurate perception of what is going on. Okay, I'm starting to go off a little bit, so I'm going to move on. On the survey, oh yes. On the survey itself. Sure. Great, so the question was, just to repeat for those who are watching the live stream, does the survey cover why the students, when they report using these other drugs, is there a why they're using on the survey? And to answer that question, no, there's not a why. We do have questions about their perceptions of, I've lost the word, so let me go forward to this next. We have attitude questions, like how they perceive support, what their attitudes are towards their community, so we can kind of glean things coming from that, but there's not a direct question that says, if you use ecstasy, why do you use them? If that... Sure. I will say that when students, there's variable reasons, right? So we don't have the specific answer from the specific students, but when we know that inhibitions are lowered, right? We know that the impulsivity, that judgment is impaired when somebody is drinking. So these are higher risk drinkers that we're talking about. And we do know that if somebody is drinking, they're not feeling, they're not getting any repercussions from it, right? They're in an area, maybe they start using marijuana, there's no negative repercussions from that. They're not feeling the immediate harms, the immediate negative repercussions, and they continue into the atmosphere, into the environment, whatever. Other things, other drugs being introduced may not seem as risky then. So the students that I was talking to yesterday were very surprised by heroin and methamphetamine. And that 0.23 for heroin is like probably 1.5 students. It's a very low number, but it is there, right? But I was talking to the students about the difference between heroin and narcotics being Oxycontin, Vicodin, any opiate-based pain reliever, and they were slightly more familiar with narcotics. Oh, we've heard of people taking, that kind of thing. It wasn't as shocking to them as heroin. The step between narcotics and heroin is not that far. It is the same opioid going into the brain. So the perception of risk to the higher risk drinker could very easily knock down just a little. They don't seem that far apart at that point. Does that make sense how I'm trying to relay that? Okay, and you had a question, ma'am.
I'm sorry, I'm getting lost. Where they can buy?
That's a great question. Sure. Where can you buy? The question is, where can they buy all of this? I don't have the immediate answers, but alcohol, nicotine, and marijuana, we could buy these legally, right? Or marijuana in part, it's kind of wishy-washy. Medical marijuana is here. Some students were telling me about Delta 9. It's fake marijuana? Okay. I was trying to glean from them information about the marijuana legalities. It's not legal. Okay. Sure. So medical marijuana is likely more accessible than, at least judging from the students' conversations as well, than like ecstasy. Okay. Drugs exist. They are in our world. They are in our culture. I can't tell you exactly where you can buy them, but it is very common for party drugs to be at parties. Party drugs such as cocaine, ecstasy, sometimes pills come into the mix, right? To be at parties, to be at clubs. They're not as hidden as we would like to think. It is not as like back alley type of transactions as we would, like when I was growing up, right? Like the picture of the drug dealer in the alley with like, you have to go do this shady deal, right? That was not accurate. I mean, maybe it is, but they're hidden in plain sight a lot of the times. So that's not a nice answer, I'm sorry. Yeah, no, it's a very good question, and also, it's startling too. These statistics are startling. Let's look at this attitudes of your students though, because this is lovely. So 86, huge majority of your students agree that their peers are a source of support when they're concerned, when they're worried, when they're stressed. That's awesome. That's a huge protective factor right there, right? That bottom level of identifying protective factors, they're tight-knit groups, they're supportive of each other, and it's in great shape. 76% of the students believe it's easy to make friends without drinking alcohol at Gulliver. Again, that's a good percentage right there, right? Very strong protective factor. And 80%, high percentage of students agree that students at this school will let you make your own decisions about drinking and alcohol. That's one, right? They are feeling like peer pressure is not as blatant, at least, as one may think. This has the wrong title at the top of the screen, so I apologize. We're still on attitudes here. 82% of your students feel valued as a person. Beautiful. These are all protections right here, and these are numbers from your kids. Teachers and school staff care about me as a student. That wraparound support, that's a huge number. 84% feel that the school is making a sincere effort to address alcohol and other drug use problems, and 78% of students are comfortable talking to at least one adult that they trust on campus about any concerns they have. So these are huge protective factors, and these attitudes right here that we're seeing on these two slides, these numbers, I will say, far outweigh. I know that, oh, I'm going the wrong way, I'm sorry. This is terrifying, I recognize this. This is a scary slide, and this is a scary slide. These are a very small number of students. These students do need to be addressed, and we do need to be worried about them. But please, please do pay attention to these slides, because this is the student body reporting these numbers, right? Not 45, this is the student body, and there is a lot of support at Gulliver. I am going to, no, okay, I'm sorry, I'm trying to keep an eye on the time. So this slide is interesting when we're talking about perceptions and social norms and how our students perceive alcohol use. We have been discussing that, right? The perception of risk is very low for students. So this slide has numbers from the early 90s and 2020. I should say 2020-ish. So the perception of harm, this is from 10th graders, regarding alcohol. Let's start at the bottom. 36% of 10th graders thought 1 or 2 drinks every day was harmful. It stayed about the same. The perception of alcohol use in our country, this is national numbers, by the way. The perception of alcohol use in our country has stayed about the same. There's not a lot of risk associated with alcohol use in 10th graders. Juul use, look at this. Juul has only been around, this is a vaping device. If you don't know, they were one of the first ones to come through in 2015. They burst onto the market. 2019, 37% of students thought that regular use was harmful. 1 year later, that's increased by 9%. That's pretty good, right? So that's been a very quick reaction by public health, by government, identifying and addressing and getting those public health campaigns out. Schools have them, right? We know the harms of vaping, and students are recognizing that. The perception of harm for smoking has continued to raise. This is great. The one thing, however, look at marijuana. Marijuana has done the exact opposite. Marijuana has done the exact opposite thing. It has decreased by more than half. The one thing with marijuana as well, the difference from the marijuana of 1991 to the difference from the marijuana today is quite stark. The amount of THC, and I don't have the exact numbers, so please know that these percentages are estimates, but they are accurate in what they're representing. The amount of marijuana in the early 90s, of THC, the active psychoactive chemical in marijuana, was about 5%. It was low. The products that have marijuana in them today, 20, 30, 40, 50, depending on the route of delivery, right? So in the 90s, pretty sure marijuana was just smoked. The route of delivery today has changed exceptionally as well. So as I was talking about the cigarettes and the body's reflex when you get that hit in the back of your throat that's uncomfortable and it's the body's reaction, same thing holds true with marijuana, right? But marijuana can now be, it's in edibles, it's in vaping devices, and that immediate, the body's reflex is bypassed very quickly. And like nicotine in vaping devices, the levels of marijuana are also significantly higher than they have been historically. So it is a more gentle route of delivery with far more drug in it. This is more about marijuana, and I want to get to, we've got about 10 minutes left, I want to get to the communication skills, and because oftentimes this is how do I talk to my kids about alcohol and other drugs? How do I bring it up? These can be very helpful, and then save a little time for questions if we have any. When talking with our children, and I am, to let you know that I am also a parent and I understand the difficulties of talking with kids and teenagers. My son is a teenager. Shorter conversations, multiple shorter conversations are far more productive and beneficial than one long conversation, right? I know with my kid, since he was little and on now, the car is the best place to have these, like, suddenly things come out in the car. When he was little, he was in the back seat, now he's sitting next to me in the passenger seat, and something will come out, and I'm like, oh, all right, I guess we're gonna drive a little bit more, right? That's my space, but treating them with respect and being as honest as possible with them. So for instance, I really want to respect you. I respect you. I want you to have your privacy. You're a young adult, you're growing up. But I do need to have a conversation with you we need to have a conversation. Perhaps this isn't the time, but I would like you to pick a time, say within the next week, and let me know when that time is going to be where we can sit down and have a 15-minute conversation about marijuana, about whatever. So put the onus on them to select the time. They know what they're coming into. They can come prepared, right? You also come prepared. Be brief, just nice, clear points, right? Sticking to our points. If we're coming into this conversation, we as parents coming into this conversation prepared as well, we'll be less reactionary. We will have a clearer brain, right? Coming in almost with our own personal agenda, right? To keep on task. I'd like to see you spending more time with friends and doing healthier things, such as being clear and specific, the why. Not just, I expect you don't use marijuana, but what do you want to see? What do you want to see from them? And be specific. And tie that in with what they already love, lacrosse, swimming, whatever it is, right? I want to see you thrive. So tell them specifically what you would like to see in them. When you grab on to what you hear them say, how can I support you, right? Maybe we hear them say, I'm not going to use alcohol or other drugs. I'm not going to use alcohol or other drugs. Great, good, cool. I'm glad you're not going to. But turn around, that's wonderful. How can I support you in that, right? Then they're like, oh, you're okay. It's not just going to be like a surface level conversation I'm not going to use. Mom wants to support me. Labeling your feelings, especially taking ownership then of feelings. When you don't come home, I'm scared. I feel scared, right? How you feel. That's excellent modeling as well for them to be able to identify and express their feelings back. Accepting a small piece of responsibility, for instance. I can be very reactionary as a parent if my son freaks me out, right? And like, oh my gosh, what have you done? And I have been known to like, yo, where have you been? Right? Backing that up, hey man, I was scared, you're right, that was not an appropriate way for me to talk to you. I was terrified, XYZ, I was scared, I was feeling, I'm sorry for reacting to you that way, this is why I reacted, right? Not giving him a pass for coming home late. My responsibility was, I screamed at you like a crazy mother, right? That was what I did, that was not appropriate. So accepting a little bit of responsibility, and offering help. How I want to support you in making healthy decisions. Perhaps that looks like doing something with the student, or I'm gonna buzz past these. This is faculty, that's the one I wanted. So, modeling healthy, appropriate attitudes and behaviors. By this, I mean, perhaps you jog regularly, perhaps whatever it is you do, it's okay to overstate things, right? I'm going for a jog this morning because this is a great way for me to relieve stress. And it's also nice because it helps us with our own mindfulness. Why am I doing this action? Why do I do this? Why do I choose to have a solid breakfast? Whatever, right? It is helping us with our own mindfulness, but then modeling for our kids, oh, yeah, that's why mom does it. That's why dad is doing this. Setting clear limits, expectations, and consequences. Knowing what's going on, getting to know their friends. It's much harder as they get into high school, right? It's harder. It's okay to be pushy. It's okay to be nosy. Your job is not to be the friend. That's not our job. I have definitely made that mistake and let my kid go to somebody's house, and I was like, man, I'm feeling bad about this, and then he came home and he was hungover or something, I've had these consequences, and I'm like, okay, and next time, I'm gonna introduce myself to the mom, and if I get a weird vibe, and if maybe I'm gonna say, no, you're not going over there, and she can like me or not. I can agree with her parenting, and I can, or not, and then I can react accordingly. It's not my job to be friends with the mom, right? My number one priority is keeping my kids safe, but I have to recheck myself with that a lot as well. Again, just with the modeling, right? And this is that foundational piece of prevention, that overall promotion of health and well-being, what's already going on. Talking about what makes you happy. Talk about what feels good to you. Show your kids that, model that joy, model just the little simple pleasures. Oh, that first drink of coffee in the morning, right? Sinking into your couch when you come home from a long day at work. These are small, but they're good moments, right? Celebrating the healthy decisions that they make, and helping them to, as their prefrontal cortex is developing, as they're learning to control their impulses, helping them appreciate that control that they are gaining, that they are learning by experience, by the mere fact of their existence on this earth, identifying, oh man, good decision. And helping them identify that and appreciate it in themselves. Okay, I'm gonna stop there, and we have about 5 minutes left. Are there any questions or comments from those in the audience that you would like to cover? Yes?
How accurate do you believe the data is that you collect from students?
That's a great question. So the question was, how accurate do you believe the data is that we collect from students? That's an awesome question, because students are also people lie on those all the time, right? While it's not 100%, it is statistically sound information. We have 25 checks and balances questions, and I have to give, for instance, so there's a smattering of questions regarding marijuana use, right? And one question will say, how many times in the past 12 months have you used marijuana? Then down the survey further, how many have you ever used marijuana in your lifetime? A few questions down, have you used marijuana, how many times have you used marijuana in the last 30 days, right? So if somebody says, I've used marijuana 5 times in the last 30 days, and then on the question somewhat before it says, I've never used marijuana, that's gonna flag that and say, oh, did they make a mistake? Does it line up with the rest of the questions regarding marijuana? Or were they just kind of being flippant and filling out randomly? So there's 25 of those safety measures in there that we use. So it is a statistically sound tool, the survey is.
I can also say that when I get the survey and they tell me how many they throw out. So they are very good at finding the ones that they think are not actually viable and tossing these out.
Yeah, for the people on the live stream, we will identify surveys that have information that is not that is not viable, and we will pull them out, or we will pull out the questions, right? But we will make a decision as to whether or not it's better to leave that data in or not. We'll look at it closely, right? Is it gonna skew it one way too far? What is the cost then if we take it out? So yeah, it is analyzed very closely. Yes?
How to explain to your child, I'm really opponents of drugs and alcohol.
You're very strong
A strong opponent
opponent, thank you.
concept,
Mm-hmm.
maybe in a very encouraged way.
Mm-hmm.
But I moved to New York last summer and I came back in January. I couldn't stand being surrounded by my girl on a daily basis. And it was really hard for me to explain to my daughter why it's okay to even smell t-shirts smelling marijuana. And why did you do that? Me explaining to her it was not super dangerous. Then seeing stores and seeing like beautiful stores like beautiful
Sure.
shop, sending little candies for Halloween.
Mm-hmm.
I live with young children.
Right.
So how do you help explain to teenagers that it's not okay, it's not expensive?
When they're seated. Using marijuana, sure. Yeah. With marijuana.
So what's going to happen? And it's also communicated that well, be happy, relax. So there is a deep stress.
That's really good questions. Yeah. How do you bridge that? How do you open? Great. So the question is, how do you negate the amount of marijuana use, the prevalence, the visibility of, to let your child know that it is not healthy, that it is not good, even though it's coming at them from many, many angles? Is that correct? Okay. That look safe, that look normal. I'm gonna challenge you. How do you do it with alcohol? So is marijuana. Sure. Sure. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I would treat it as let your child know it's not okay. We get lots of information that is false, right? There's lots of information. We cover a lot of media literacy with kids as well regarding vape and marijuana, but challenging them where you're getting your information from. How is that? So we see this CBD sign, what is that saying to you? Do you think it's like, oh, it's saying it's gonna cure everything, da, 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 and I wanna go try it, it's beautiful colors in that store. Identifying what is appealing. What are the tactics that are being used? What is in that that's appealing, that's attracting you? Okay, so what about the real product? Do you know anything? So it's a really good time for further discussions, dissecting their world around them, right? Even if it is somebody using marijuana on the sidewalk down the street, or as they're walking by on the street, right? I will say I believe that it is similar to alcohol in so much as we've been pretty conditioned to expect and see alcohol around us. And marijuana is different because it is newer, we can smell it maybe more so than somebody who's drinking, but we don't know if somebody is drunk or stoned if they're not actively doing it in front of us, right? So I believe, I don't know if that made sense, I apologize. Have conversations with your kids, and it's a really great learning time, I guess, for them to be aware, for them to see, for them to dig deeper into what they are seeing and if it is relevant to them and how so. It's not really an easy answer, but it does help, like, if we can have those discussions, like helping people think critically about our environment around us and what is beneficial for us, specifically relating to marijuana use, relating to drinking, and how we might be swayed without even recognizing that we are being influenced, right? Identifying these things that are influencing us. Does that help at all? Okay, sorry. And I do need to put a period at the end of this now. Thank you all so much for attending. Thank you for joining us on YouTube. I don't know where the camera is. And the slides will be made, Jonathan will have these slides if you guys want, and he can disseminate them as, if you want to review them or anything. But thank you all so much. It's been a pleasure. Your children are lovely.